The text came in at 11:14 at night, right when I was standing behind the counter of the diner, wiping down the same coffee stain for the third time because I needed my hands busy enough to keep my mind from falling apart. The message said, "Do not let Evelyn sign the revised trust tomorrow. Once the lake house and portfolio move, she loses everything." I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before I typed back, "Wrong number." A minute later, the reply came. Who is this? I almost ignored it. I should have ignored it. My life had already been hard enough without picking up someone else's mess. But something about the message felt wrong, in a way that pressed right against the old bruises in my chest. My mother used to say that certain lies had a smell to them. She said the good ones smelled like perfume. The bad ones smelled like bleach and panic. This one smelled like panic. So I typed, "The wrong person." The next message came so fast it felt like the phone had been waiting in my hand. Then maybe the wrong person just saved me. I laughed once, but it was the kind of laugh people make when they're tired enough to cry. I didn't know it yet, but that text was the first crack in a wall of lies that had been standing for years. And once it started breaking, it didn't just change the life of the woman it was meant for. It changed mine. My name is Ava Monroe. And at the time all of this started, I was 31 years old, working double shifts in Columbus, Ohio, trying to keep my little brother in school, trying to keep the lights on in an apartment that still felt too expensive, even though it was tiny, and trying not to think too hard about how unfair life could be when nobody was watching. People like to say you find out who your family is when times get hard. I already knew. My father left when I was 9 and never looked back. My mother worked herself into the ground and still managed to make our home feel warm, even when the pantry was nearly empty and the rent was late. She taught me how to stretch pasta, how to sew a button, how to smile when someone insulted you so they'd never know they got to you. She also taught me something else, something I wish I had understood sooner. She taught me that blood does not make people loyal. When my mother passed away, her brother, my Uncle Ray, stepped in like he was a hero. He put on a sad face, talked in a soft voice, signed papers I never had time to read, and promised me he would take care of everything. By the time I realized what he'd really taken care of, the house my mother had raised us in was gone. He said it was for taxes. Then he said it was for debt. Then he said the family needed a fresh start and I should stop living in the past. The next winter, he sold the place to a developer and moved into a condo with a view of the river, while I moved into a one-bedroom with peeling paint and a heater that made a sound like it was choking. That was the day I learned that people don't always steal your money first. Sometimes they steal your footing. So when that strange message showed up on my phone, my first instinct was not to help anybody. It was to protect myself from whatever kind of pain lived on the other side of it. But the replies kept coming. "Please don't forward this. Are you there? I know this sounds insane, but I think somebody in my family is trying to force my mother to sign paperwork she doesn't understand." I looked around the diner. My manager was in the back, yelling at a cook about overcooked fries. A pair of teenagers were arguing over milkshakes. A man in a work jacket was asleep in booth 6 with his head on the table. No one in the whole place cared about my phone. I should have let it go. Instead, I asked, "Who is your mother?" The reply came almost instantly. Evain Hart. The name meant nothing to me then. I only knew one thing about rich people's names. They usually came with bigger problems. The next morning, after I'd gotten home at nearly 2 in the morning and slept for 4 hours on a couch that sagged in the middle, I found one more message waiting for me. "I'm Nora. I work for Mrs. Hart. I was supposed to send this to another number. I think I picked the wrong contact when I was rushing. I'm sorry. Please delete the messages." I sat there in the dim light of my apartment and read that sentence over and over. Wrong contact. Wrong number. Wrong person. That was all it had been. An accident. But accidents can open doors. I should have deleted it. I really should have. Instead, I wrote back, "If your boss is being pressured, don't let them sign anything until somebody independent reviews it." Then I added, after a pause, "And if you think someone's lying, save every message." Nora didn't answer for almost an hour. When she did, her message was simple. "Why do you care?" That question should have made me stop. It didn't. Because the truth was, I cared for the same reason people jump at a scream in the dark. Not because they want the noise, because they recognize the danger. I typed, because I know what it looks like when family starts using paperwork like a weapon. After that, Nora called me. Her voice was quiet, careful, like she was afraid somebody might be standing beside her and listening. She told me she worked as an assistant in the office of the Hart family. Evelyn Hart was 82 years old, sharp as a tack, and determined to protect her late husband's company from her only son, Victor. According to Nora, Victor had recently returned to town with a new wife, a polished smile, and a growing list of demands. He wanted control over the family trust. He wanted the lake house. He wanted decisions made quickly, quietly, and without questions. And he wanted his mother to sign before she had time to change her mind. Nora said she had seen enough to know something was wrong, but she was terrified. She was a low-level employee. If she accused the wrong people without proof, she'd be out of a job by Friday. I told her she should go to a lawyer. She said she couldn't afford one. I almost laughed at the irony of that. The people with the most to hide always acted like honesty was a luxury item. The next afternoon, I was supposed to meet my brother Liam outside his community college, but Nora sent me a photo first. It was a scanned copy of a trust amendment. I wasn't a lawyer, but I could still read enough to understand the part that mattered. If Evelyn signed it, Victor would have broad control over the assets, the lake house, the investment accounts, the charitable foundation that had apparently been set up in her husband's name. There was one phrase that made my stomach tighten. Upon signature, prior authority is superseded. I didn't know everything about trusts, but I knew enough to understand the trick. It wasn't just a change. It was a takeover dressed up like paperwork. I called Nora back. Does Evelyn know this is what she's signing? No, Nora whispered. At least I don't think so. Victor keeps saying it's just housekeeping. He keeps telling her the old documents are outdated, that this is cleaner, easier, and better for everyone. Is she sick? No. She's tired. That's different. I could hear something in the background. Muffled voices. A door closing. Where are you? I asked. Outside her room. I sat up straight. Room. She's at the Hart Estate guest wing. Victor said the house was too loud for her while she recovered. Recovered from what? There was a tiny pause. Nothing serious, Nora said. That's what makes it so strange. I didn't know why those words made the hair on my arms lift. Maybe because I'd heard them before, from relatives who said someone was just resting when they were really being controlled. Maybe because I'd spent my whole life around people who insisted everything was fine when it clearly was not. I told Nora not to let Evelyn sign anything until an independent attorney reviewed the papers. Then, because I apparently hadn't learned enough from my own disasters, I added, and if you think they're watching her phone, write me from a different number. That night, I met Liam outside the campus library and tried to act normal while he told me about a chemistry quiz and a part-time job he wanted to apply for. He was 17, lanky, all elbows and too much hope. He still believed hard work was enough to fix most things. I had not yet found the courage to tell him that hard work is only one half of survival. The other half is getting lucky with who notices you. By the next morning, Nora wrote back from a different number. Mrs. Hart wants to meet you. I nearly dropped my phone. Why? She read your message. She says anyone who tells a stranger to save the messages is either very brave or very familiar with betrayal. I stared at those words while the kettle hissed on my stove. Very brave or very familiar with betrayal. That felt like a mirror being held up to the worst parts of my life. I replied, tell her I'm not brave. I'm just tired of watching bad people win. Nora sent me an address. The Hart Estate wasn't the kind of place I was used to seeing except in magazines or on the news when some celebrity had ruined their own life in public. It sat behind a long iron gate on a tree-lined street in the old part of the city. All brick and glass and trimmed hedges so perfect they looked fake. I arrived in my only decent dress, the one I wore to interviews and funerals and every event where I needed to look like I belonged to a life I didn't actually have. Nora met me at the side entrance with a nervous smile and dark circles under her eyes. You came, she said. You sounded serious. She gave me a look that said serious didn't even cover it. Then she led me through a side hallway into a sitting room where the windows looked out over a wide lawn and a small stone path that ended at a greenhouse. Evelyn Hart was sitting near the fireplace in a gray sweater, straight-backed, silver-haired, and watching me like she had already decided I was either trustworthy or dangerous. Maybe both. She didn't waste time. "You are the girl who told my assistant to save the messages." "Yes, ma'am. And you have enough sense to know when a family is trying to trap someone with legal language." "I've had practice." That got the slightest twitch of a smile out of her. "Tell me what happened to you," she said. I hesitated. I didn't like talking about my family to strangers. But something about Evelyn made lying feel pointless. Maybe it was the fact that she looked tired in the way powerful people rarely did. Not weak. Just exhausted by the cost of being surrounded by people who wanted things from her. So I told her the short version. My mother. My uncle. The house. The papers. The sale. The way I'd been pushed out of decisions until I was only left with regret and a box of old photographs. By the time I finished, Evelyn was silent. Finally, she said, "Then you know the shape of this thing." I nodded. "My son is charming when he wants something," she said, "and cruel when he doesn't get it." Nora shifted awkwardly near the door, like she wanted to disappear. Evelyn went on. "My husband built the business from the ground up. He also built a foundation to help local students, repair homes, and support families who needed a hand during hard times. I kept all of it running after he passed. My son, Victor, has never liked that. He says I care more about outsiders than my own blood." She said the last part without emotion, which somehow made it worse. "He's been pressuring me for months," she continued. "First politely, then less politely. He says he's protecting me from financial mistakes. He says I'm too old to manage complicated things. He says if I love him, I'll make it simple." I had heard that language before, too. Simple. For them? Not for the person signing away their life. "Why now?" I asked. Evelyn looked at me for a long moment. "Because he's in debt," she said. "And because he thinks I don't know." "Do you know?" "I know enough." That was when she leaned forward and said the line that changed the direction of everything. "My son did not come back to save me. He came back to harvest me." The room went quiet. Even Nora looked stunned. Evelyn stood up slowly, carefully, and crossed to the mantel. She picked up a framed photograph of a young man in a graduation gown, then set it back down as if it no longer belonged to the same life. "I need proof," she said. "Not suspicion. Proof." I crossed my arms. "Then don't sign anything. Let him keep talking." "He won't stop talking. Men like Victor believe repetition creates truth." That line hit me so hard I almost laughed. It sounded exactly like my Uncle Ray. Evelyn studied me. "You said your uncle stole your mother's house." "Yes." "And was there a lawyer?" "Of course there was a lawyer." Evelyn nodded once, like she'd just confirmed something she already feared. "That I may know the name." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "What name?" "Harold Finch." I felt the room tilt. That was the name on the old estate papers my mother used to mention when she thought I wasn't listening. Finch had been the attorney who handled everything. Finch had been the man who told me to trust my uncle. Finch had been the one who made everything sound official while my childhood disappeared in a stack of signatures. Evelyn watched my face change and understood immediately. "He did this to your family too, didn't he?" I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. Nora whispered, "He's Victor's attorney now." That was the moment the two stories snapped together. My house, my mother, my uncle, and this family's money, this old estate, this pressure, this paperwork, same machinery, different victims. I left the house that day with a copy of the trust amendment, Nora's number, and a strange feeling in my chest that I had not felt in years. Purpose. Not peace. Not yet. Purpose. Over the next week, I became the sort of person I had never imagined I'd be. I took notes. I saved messages. I met Nora in parking lots and coffee shops, and once in the library bathroom, where she handed me a folder hidden inside a paperback novel. Victor had been moving things quietly. Not enough to trigger obvious alarms. Enough to create confusion. There were transfers from the foundation to a shell company. There were renovation invoices that didn't match any actual work. There were sudden consulting fees paid to people whose names meant nothing but whose bank accounts had once been empty. It was all neat. That was the worst part. Bad people often are. Evelyn, meanwhile, was being managed. That was the polite word Nora used, managed. Victor visited every other day with his wife, Daphne, who had a smile so smooth it felt like a blade hidden in silk. Daphne spoke in soft concern and carried expensive perfume and always made a point of telling Evelyn how tired she looked. "I worry about your stress level," she'd say, in the tone of a woman who had never worried about another human being in her life. Victor was different. Victor was all warmth and fatherly patience on the surface. He'd take Evelyn's hand and say things like, "Mom, we just want what's best for you." Then, when he thought nobody was listening, his voice would go flat. "You're making this hard." I heard him say it once from the hall. I was there because Nora had sent me a message saying Evelyn wanted to see me urgently. When I reached the side entrance, the door had been left cracked open just enough for me to hear the argument. "I'm not signing anything I haven't read," Evelyn said. "You've read enough to know the broad strokes. That's not the same thing. You don't need every detail. I need every detail if the details decide who gets what after I'm gone." Victor sighed like a man dealing with a stubborn child. "Why are you doing this? Is it because of her?" "Of who?" "That little assistant. The waitress, whatever she is." I froze. "You should be careful who you insult in your own hallway," Evelyn said. Then Victor laughed. It was a short, humorless sound. "She's a stranger," Evelyn answered, and I could hear every word. "So was your father once when he married me. Then he became my husband. Don't confuse usefulness with invisibility." I stood perfectly still. A stranger. That was all I had been to them. A random voice on a wrong number. A woman with a cheap phone and no last name that mattered in their world. And yet here they were, nervous enough to whisper about me in the hallway. That night, Nora called me from her car. "He knows we're talking," she said. "Victor?" He asked why Mrs. Hart keeps asking about a waitress. My stomach clenched. "Did you tell him anything?" "No, but he's suspicious." A pause. Then, in a low voice, she added, "He also asked whether you were the daughter of Lorraine Monroe." I sat up straight so fast the couch squeaked. "What? How does he know your mother's name?" I didn't have an answer. The next day, I drove to my Uncle Ray's condo with my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my neck. I had not seen him in nearly 2 years. He opened the door in a pressed shirt and a fake smile. The kind that always made him look like he was welcoming you into his life when he was really measuring what he could get from yours. "Ava," he said, surprised. "This is a nice visit." "No, it's not." His smile tightened a little. "Still dramatic, I see." I pushed past him and held up the trust amendment copy. "Do you know this name?" He glanced at it once and gave a shrug that was too fast. "No, don't lie to me." "Ava, did you work with Harold Finch?" His expression changed. "Not much, but enough." I stepped closer. "Did you?" He looked toward the hallway as if someone might be listening, then closed the door behind me. "Where did you get that?" he asked. So that was yes. "You sold my mother's house," I said. His jaw tightened. "Your mother's house was a financial problem. You stole it. You were a kid." I laughed, and the sound came out ugly. "That is not an excuse." He rubbed a hand over his face. "You think I had a choice? Your mother's bills were piling up." Finch said the timing was right. He said if we sold then, everyone came out clean. Everyone except us. He looked at me the way people look at a bill they never planned to pay. "You don't understand how these things work." I understand exactly how they work. A man in a nice suit talks, another man signs, and the woman who actually built the home ends up with nothing. Ray's mouth flattened. "You've been talking to people." I didn't answer. "That family," he said carefully, "is not your problem. You made it my problem when you put your hands in my mother's life." His face hardened. Then he said the thing I had not expected. "Victor Hart paid off the old debt I owed." I went still. "So you've been helping him?" Ray's eyes flicked away. That was answer enough. I felt "You're unbelievable," I whispered. He straightened. "Life is not fair, Ava. You should have learned that by now." I stared at him. This man who had once held me on his knee and promised my mother he would look after us. This man who had smiled at my grief and used it like a ladder. "You know what I learned?" I said quietly. I learned that people who talk most about family are usually the first ones to sell it. I left before he could answer. That should have been the end of my mistake. One wrong number, one accidental thread, one ugly family truth exposed. It was not the end, because Victor found out I had spoken to my uncle, and once that happened, things became personal. The first threat came through a message from an unknown number. Stay away from my mother. I stared at it for a second before I realized it was meant for me. Not Nora, not Evelyn, me. A second message came before I could even process the first. You don't know who you're dealing with. I showed the texts to Nora, who went pale. He's escalating. Let him. She looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. But fear has a way of sharpening a person. After too many times being pushed around, there comes a moment when being afraid stops feeling useful. Do you really think this helps Mrs. Hart? She asked. I looked at the folder on the table. I think if he's willing to threaten a stranger to protect a fraud, that means we're close. Nora swallowed hard. Victor is trying to move the date up. My stomach dropped. Move what date? The signing. I looked up. Tomorrow. The next 24 hours felt like standing in the eye of a storm with my arms full of papers and my heart beating too fast to think. Evelyn wanted me there the next afternoon. She said she had something to show me. When I arrived, Nora let me in through the side entrance with a face so tight it almost scared me. He brought the lawyer, she whispered. And your uncle. I turned to her sharply. My uncle is here? She nodded. Why? I don't know. Every instinct I had told me this was a trap. We moved quietly through the hall and into the study, where the whole family seemed to have gathered under the pretense of another discussion. Victor stood near the fireplace, hands in his pockets, looking relaxed in the way only dishonest people can look relaxed, when they think the outcome is already theirs. Daphne sat with one ankle crossed over the other, pretending concern. Harold Finch had a leather briefcase open on the desk, and there, near the window, was my Uncle Ray, who looked smaller in that room than he ever had in my life. Evelyn was in an armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked fragile only if you were stupid enough to confuse stillness with weakness. Victor turned when he saw me. His smile never reached his eyes. There she is, he said. The mysterious stranger. I ignored him and walked straight to Evelyn. She nodded once. Did you bring it? I held up my phone. Yes. Nora moved beside me, visibly shaking. Victor's expression changed. What is this? Evelyn answered. A witness. Harold Finch cleared his throat. Mrs. Hart, I'd like to remind everyone that we're here to keep things simple. Evelyn looked at him with open contempt. There it is again, she said. Simple. Always simple when it's someone else's future. Victor stepped forward. Mom, we're not doing this now. We are doing this now, Evelyn said. He exhaled sharply. You're tired. You've been upset for weeks. Let's get you comfortable and come back to the paperwork after dinner. No. Mom? I said no. Nobody in the room moved. Evelyn turned her head slightly toward me. Ava, did Nora show you the transfer records? Yes. Did she show you the consulting payments? Yes. Did she show you the side company? Yes. Victor's face went still. Evelyn continued, her voice clear and unwavering. Did she show you the fact that my son has been moving foundation money into a private account under a business name no one in this room can explain? Harold Finch shifted uncomfortably. Victor laughed once. That's ridiculous. Is it? Evelyn asked. He stepped closer. You're confused. There was something almost chilling in how casually he said it. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment and then said, No, Victor, I'm finally paying attention. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Victor's eyes narrowed. What are you doing? Saving your family, I said. He gave a short, incredulous laugh. You? A stranger? I looked him right in the face. That's funny. Your mother already said that about me. Evelyn's mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Then I played the recording. It was only about 40 seconds long. Long enough, though. Long enough to catch Victor on the side hallway the day before, talking to Harold Finch with his voice low and sharp. Just make sure she signs before the weekend, he had said. Finch had replied, She's being difficult. Victor, then make it look like she isn't. Finch, And if she refuses? Victor. She won't refuse once her access is limited. The room went dead silent. Daphne's face went white. Ray took one step backward like he'd been hit. Victor lunged forward. That was edited. Was it? I asked. He turned to Evelyn. You can't possibly believe this. Evelyn rose slowly from her chair. The room seemed to stop breathing. I believe, she said, that you thought I would be too old to notice. Victor stared at her. I believe, she went on, that you used my health as an excuse to isolate me. I was protecting you. From whom? From people trying to use you. Like you? He looked genuinely stunned. That was the moment I saw it clearly. Victor truly believed he was entitled to everything in the room, including his mother's gratitude. He had spent so long treating greed like a family value that he no longer recognized shame when it stood in front of him. Evelyn walked to the desk and picked up a sealed envelope. Then she held it out, not to Victor, but to me. Open it, she said. I froze. What is it? The reason you're here. My fingers shook as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, old and folded and addressed in my mother's handwriting. For 1 second, I forgot how to breathe. My mother's handwriting. Her tiny, slanted letters, the same way she used to label school lunches and birthday cards and the little notes she left in my coat pocket when I was having a hard day. My eyes blurred. I looked up at Evelyn, confused and terrified and suddenly not standing in the same life I had been in 10 seconds before. She worked here, Evelyn said quietly. Years ago. Your mother was my bookkeeper before Victor took over parts of the company. She found inconsistencies. She was afraid. She left this letter with me in case something happened. The room spun. My mother had worked for the Hart family. She had known. She had tried to say something. I looked at the envelope again with trembling hands and saw the truth in the one detail I had missed. This wasn't just a letter to Evelyn. It was a letter to me. My chest tightened as I unfolded the paper. Ava, it began. If you are reading this, then I never found the right words in time. There are people who smile while they take what belongs to others. They believe a quiet woman will always stay quiet. They believe a daughter will be too tired to ask questions. I need you to know that I saw what they did. I kept copies. If I am gone, do not let them bury the truth. I could hardly see through the tears. It went on for another page. My mother had documented what she found. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to show Finch's name. Enough to show Victor's patterns going back years. Enough to show that the same attorney who had helped erase my childhood had also been the one trying to erase Evelyn's future. I looked up slowly, my entire body numb. You knew? I whispered to Evelyn. She nodded once. I knew your mother was honest. I also knew she was frightened. I should have done more. I stared at the letter and felt a strange, fierce grief rise inside me. Not just for the loss of her, for the fact that she had tried. She had really tried. She had seen the lie and left a trail, trusting that one day someone would be stubborn enough to follow it. Victor looked between us, his confidence cracking at the edges. What is this? He said. Evelyn turned toward him with a calm that was almost terrifying. This, she said, is your final chance to leave with dignity. He gave a bitter laugh. You're bluffing. Nora stepped forward then, shaking but determined. I already sent copies to the bank's compliance office, she said, and to a forensic accountant. Victor whipped around. You did what? Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. I did what you wouldn't expect from someone who reads every line. Harold Finch slammed his briefcase shut. Ray started talking all at once, trying to explain, trying to back away from the room, trying to make himself smaller than he was. This isn't what it looks like. Nobody listened. Victor's eyes darted from face to face, looking for the old leverage he always used and finding none. Then he made the mistake that broke him. He turned to me and said, You think this makes you special? You're still just the woman who answered the wrong text. I met his eyes and said, No, I'm the one who saved the right one. That landed harder than anything else in the room. For the first time, Victor had nothing to say. Evelyn pressed a button on the side of her chair and looked directly at the doorway. 2 security officers entered. Victor stared. What is this? My attorney, Evelyn said, was notified this morning. Your access to the trust is suspended. Your position with the foundation is under review. And if you do not hand over every copy of every document you've touched, the authorities will be called in before sunset." Harold Finch looked like he might faint. Ray did faint, sort of. He sat down too quickly on the edge of a chair and started muttering to himself like a man whose life had just met the wall. Daphne stood abruptly. "Victor?" He turned on her. "Don't." She took one look at the room, one look at the certainty on Evelyn's face, and whatever loyalty she had been pretending to own left her immediately. "I'm not doing this," she said. Victor's expression changed in disbelief. "You're leaving me?" She adjusted her purse and gave him a hard smile. "You're not nearly as rich as you acted." That was the last time I saw her in his corner. The fallout moved fast after that. The bank froze the accounts. The foundation launched an internal audit. Finch was removed within days. The family papers got reviewed line by someone who actually knew what they were doing. And once the numbers were laid out, the pattern was impossible to deny. There were shell transfers, hidden fees, property moves that had never been approved, a chain of signatures too neat to be accidental and too ugly to be legal. Ray tried to claim he had been confused. Nobody believed him. He tried to blame Finch. Finch blamed Victor. Victor blamed everyone but himself. That part was almost boring in the end. Powerful men always think that if they talk quickly enough, consequences will get tired and leave. They do not. What happened next was slower, but better. The house I lost as a kid came back into the conversation when Evelyn's forensic team pulled the old deed records and matched the forged signature to Ray's account. It turned out my uncle hadn't just sold the family home under pressure. He had taken a payment to smooth over a set of shady property maneuvers tied to the same circle that had been feeding off the Hart family for years. The old house was gone, yes. That part couldn't be fixed. But the settlement money that came from the civil case covered more than I expected. Enough to pay off my debt, enough to help Liam, enough to buy a small house of our own with a porch I could sit on and breathe without hearing someone else's footsteps in my ceiling. I never got back the home I grew up in, but I got back the feeling that my life was mine. As for Victor, the legal consequences took their time, but they came. The company board removed him. The foundation barred him from all decision-making. The public story that eventually leaked was careful and polite, because rich people always try to use careful words when they've been caught doing ugly things. Fraud, misappropriation, coercion, misrepresentation. But the private truth was uglier. He had tried to trap his own mother in her own name, and the woman he underestimated most had been waiting quietly with enough evidence to bury him. There was a hearing months later where he finally had to sit in a room and listen while the facts were read aloud. I was there with Nora. Evelyn asked me to come. She said I was part of the story now, whether I liked it or not. Victor looked thinner by then. Not healthier, just less sure of himself. That was the real punishment for a man like him. Not the money, not the headlines. The loss of the audience that had once let him feel untouchable. He saw me sitting near the back and his eyes hardened. But he didn't say anything. He couldn't, because there was nothing left to say. After the hearing, Evelyn invited me to the lake house for the first time. The place was beautiful, in a quiet, old-fashioned way. Not flashy, just real. A wide porch, soft wind through tall trees, water catching the evening light. It felt like a place built by people who expected to come back someday. Evelyn handed me a folder and said, "This is not a reward." I looked inside. It was a scholarship trust established in my mother's name, along with a small advisory role for me and a seat on the community outreach committee she had once fought to protect. I blinked at her. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," she said. "Your mother deserved to be remembered for what she saw, not what others took from her." That broke something open in me. Not in a painful way, in a healing way. I sat on that porch as the sky turned orange over the lake and thought about how strange life is. How one wrong text, sent in a rush by a frightened assistant, had dragged me into a world I never would have touched otherwise. How a message that was never meant for me had become the first honest thing anyone had said to me in years. It had not only exposed a lie, it had returned me to myself. Nora ended up staying at the foundation. Not because she owed anybody anything, but because for the first time she was working somewhere that rewarded honesty instead of punishing it. She called me a week later, laughing for the first time since this whole thing began. What? I asked. Your uncle is trying to negotiate his way out of the settlement. I snorted. Of course he is. He keeps saying he made mistakes. Did he? According to the lawyer, he made a lot of them. That made me smile. And Evelyn? Evelyn became the closest thing to family I had gained in a long time. She never tried to replace my mother. She never acted like kindness erased history. She simply showed up, again and again, in the steady way that people do when they understand what it costs to trust somebody after betrayal. A few months after everything settled, she asked me to dinner at the lake house. We ate on the porch while the light faded, and she told me something I still think about. I spent too long believing family could excuse anything, she said. That blood should protect what behavior destroys. It took a stranger to remind me that loyalty without honesty is just fear wearing perfume. I laughed through tears at that because it sounded exactly like something my mother would have said if she'd lived long enough to meet her. When I told Evelyn that, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. And that was the moment I finally understood that some endings are not really endings at all. Some are simply the first time the truth gets to stay. Victor lost his position, his influence, and the respect of the only world he cared about. Ray lost his comfort, his excuses, and the false dignity he had built by stepping on other people's lives. Finch lost his license. Daphne lost her patience. The foundation was restructured under court supervision. The scholarship program was renamed after my mother. And the house I grew up in, the one that had been sold out from under us, became a story everyone involved would have to remember whether they liked it or not. But the part that mattered most was smaller than that. It was Liam walking across his graduation stage with a scholarship letter in his hand and my mother's name printed at the bottom. It was me standing at the back of the auditorium, crying without shame for the first time in years. It was Evelyn sitting beside me, patting my arm like she had every right to be there. And it was the memory of that text lighting up my phone at 11:14 on a lonely night, when I had no idea I was about to step into a life where the wrong number would become the right kind of justice. People always ask me now if I was scared. Of course I was scared. I was scared of Victor. I was scared of Finch. I was scared of my uncle. I was scared of opening old wounds and finding out my mother had tried to protect us while I was too young to understand. But fear did not win. The lie lost because it was built to survive silence, and one tired woman with a cracked phone and too much history to ignore it decided to answer. That is all it took. One wrong message, one honest reply, and a chain of lies so careful it never saw the truth coming until it was already too late. Sometimes I still think about the stranger I was that night, standing behind a diner counter, wiping at a coffee stain while somebody else's secret slipped into my life. I used to believe accidents were meaningless. Now I know better. Sometimes the accident is the beginning. Sometimes the mistake is the rescue. And sometimes the message sent to the wrong person is exactly the one that changes everything.